There we go. Order. Rupert Lowe to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I beg to move that the House has considered the future of fishing beyond 2026. Britain has some of the richest fishing grounds in the world within our 200-mile nautical mile, 230-mile coastal limit, within which we own both living and non-living resources. Historically, this gold mine has supported a flourishing fishing industry, as well as an extensive fish processing industry to supply valuable, healthy, sustainable food to both domestic and export markets. Iceland, Norway and the Faroe Islands enjoy a profitable and sustainable fishing industry and are the model to which we should aspire. In June 2016, 17.4 million people voted to leave the European Union in an unambiguously worded referendum called by David Cameron. In order to understand the demise of our fishing industry, which was severely damaged by both World War I and World War II, it's important to understand the history. Britain, Russia and Serbia have always provided the balance of power between the frequent Anglo-German wars on the continent. After the defeat of Napoleon in 1815, Europe enjoyed 100 years of peace, free trade, and both fishing and general prosperity. In 1914, a unified Germany precipitated the worst European war ever, which combined improving armament technology as well as early forms of biological warfare, resulting in massive loss of life. This war was followed 20 years later by another brutal German-inspired war, which caused widespread death, dislocation, and economic misery as Hitler sought to conquer Europe. The British establishment came close to surrender to Mr. Hitler, avoided only by the inspirational Winston Churchill. The post-war socialist reconstruction of Europe reflected the continent's loss of confidence and the need to mutualise the risk of another Franco-German conflict. The British Empire began to break up, and the British establishment lost the will to govern a proud sovereign nation, as socialism precipitated a visit to the International Monetary Fund and a sterling crisis in the 1970s. We joined the European Economic Community in 1973. British fishing was one of the sacrificial industries to pay the price for this membership, as the other member states were free to fish outside a 12-mile coastal band, please? With some allowed to fish in the 6 to 12-mile zone. It's interesting that the Dutch were active in fishing our waters before we won the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War in 1784, with the North Sea described as the principal gold mine of the Dutch. After the defeat of Napoleon in 1815, where Admiral Nelson...
Will the honourable member please give way?
I will give way.
Thank you very much. I came here under the misapprehension that I was attending a debate on fishing. And I know my history perfectly well. Could we move on to fish, please?
A very unhelpful intervention, but nevertheless, I will carry on as I was before. After the defeat of Napoleon in 1815, where Admiral Nelson, a proud Norfolk man, played a prominent part, it is interesting to note that British fishing had a golden century. My constituency, Great Yarmouth, is known as the herring capital of the world, with herring fishing at its peak between 1900 and 1913, when up to 12 million tonnes of bloaters were landed, processed and sold. Sales were domestic, with a prolific export of smoked herring going to both Germany and Russia. Mackerel, cod and sole off the Dogger Bank were also prolific. Since our membership of the EU, European fishing fleets have fished our waters heavily, using questionable methods like the electric pulse fishing, which damages the seabed and destroys biodiversity. Super trawlers have and continue to plunder our waters, scooping up whole shoals of fish, including sea bass, common dolphin, bluefin tuna and John Dory, driven more by profit than conservation. DEFRA Marine Management are allowing EU vessels to help themselves to our fish, unmonitored and unregulated. Their super trawlers have destroyed fisheries off West Africa, been banned in Australia and are causing controversy in Chile. EU membership has severely damaged our fishing and our fish processing industries and threatens to break up our legacy fishing skills permanently destroying our fishing expertise. Both will require extensive investment, but 2026 and the full return of our fishing rights under the deficient Brexit arrangements opens up a golden opportunity to rebuild both industries and revitalise our coastal communities that have been overlooked and badly treated. The model for this reconstruction has to be Iceland, who took control of her 200-mile coastal waters and is now a flourishing centre for fishing and fish processing, with a vibrant export market. Within 2 weeks of the now-forgotten cod wars, we were importing Icelandic fish to be processed in Hull factories, desperate for raw fish to keep their staff employed. Holland, France and Belgium have huge factories in rather the same way. Europe has made Brexit very difficult for the UK by design, quibbling over quality, creating uncertainty and filibustering in the hope that the UK will rejoin their failing post-war trade bloc, founded on a protectionist socialist philosophy. They need our fish, and currently the French have 92% of cod quota in the Channel and 3 times the British allocation of Dover sole, 4 times more cod and 5 times more haddock in the Celtic Sea. Of 35,000 tonnes of fish arriving in Boulogne each year, 2/3 come from British waters. There is an opportunity to rebuild the industry where 1 job at sea supports 8 jobs on the land, with processors, merchants, transport, shipbuilding, welders, platers, electricians, carpenters, engineers, painters, and other areas of expertise benefiting. The inability of DEFRA to respond to the evolving industry is exemplified by the emergence of bluefin tuna in British waters, where quotas only exist for 40 tonnes, when 400 to 600 tonnes would help start the process of rebuilding. We must ensure fish are landed in our ports. An education programme is undertaken to promote British fish, tax breaks given for fishing boat purchases and processing factory construction. If the government is intent on fulfilling its duty to the British electorate, then we need to know their post-2026 plans now for a rebuilding blueprint to benefit our economy and food security. Our £100 billion trade deficit was overlooked in our Brexit negotiations, which resulted in a border down the Irish Sea and a threat to the sanctity of the Union. We need to know the government's intentions now. The Reform Party has the blueprint for success, but it cannot happen without committed intent to act in Britain's best interest. How can we move forward and ensure that the fishing industry is properly protected and supported as it should be? We need to reintroduce a revised 1988 Merchant Shipping Act to rebalance quotas, protect against quota hopping and foreign exploitation, speed up the return of the fishing quota to UK fishermen, introduce a fee or licence to access the UK fishing waters from foreign, including EU vessels, with the money to be invested directly in the UK fishing industry. Enforce rules that all fish caught in UK waters must be landed, processed and then exported from the UK, with the eventual rule that all fish caught by foreign vessels in UK waters will be landed and processed in the UK once the fish processing industry has reached sufficient capacity. We should ban foreign super trawlers from UK waters. We should bring fishing communities and their generational knowledge into the policy-making process. guarantee sustainable stocks by working closely with national partners and within the regional organisations, such as the North East Atlantic Fisheries Commission, and by implementing a dynamic management system. Wholesale reform of the quota system and a ban on the commercial trading of fishing quotas. We should prevent foreign owners from using a British flag of convenience through stringent tax and provenance tests. Crucially, ensure full British control over our exclusive economic zone. The time has now come for all members of this House representing coastal communities to come together to fight for British fishermen. We must unite and push this government to restore full British fishing rights in British waters. Anything short of that would be an unacceptable failure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Can I just remind members, anyone intending to speak, please stand in your place to give me a chance of understanding how many people are wanting to make a contribution. The question is that the House has considered the future of fishing after 2026. Turkel Crichton.
Thank you, Mr. Effer. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I'd like to thank the honourable member for staging this important debate. But as he wouldn't take an intervention, I'm forced onto my feet to make a speech, if only to ask the honourable member if he's aware that 2/3 of the UK's fishing quota is owned by just 25 businesses, that 80% of England's fishing quota is in the hands of foreign owners or rich list families in the Sunday Times that appear in the Sunday Times each year. And how we will resolve that foreign ownership of the fleet and of the quota is a question he must answer in his own conclusions. I come here fresh from the AGM of the Western Isles Fishermen Association in my own constituency in the Hill and Yare, and while fishing quotas are devolved to another place, another parliament, I think the principle that I make and the common ground I might find with the honourable member are points worth making. The Western Isles Fishermen Association looks on Brexit, as many of us do, as having just one glimmer of hope, and that is the return of fishing quota to the UK government. And this has led to additional fishing quota being available, at least for the next 2 years, and the distribution of that quota is devolved amongst all different governments. But the Western Isles Fishermen Association argue, and I argue too, that this is a national resource and should be distributed in a system that's fair, takes into account, as my honourable member says, the economic linkage between quotas, between fragile coastal communities and those that are adjacent to quotas. If this quota is distributed according to historic catching patterns, it will simply go to the Sunday Times rich list and the foreign shipping owners he so deplores. So the distribution of quota on historic track records would not give any opportunity to our coastal communities. The system has to be rethought, has to be linked, and additional quota given to municipal or local authorities in order that they can then share that quota, lease that quota to locally based boats, and then build up, as he wants to build up, from very small beginnings, a new pelagic fleet, new processing, and a new future.
Give way just before he sits.
Just before he sits. I'm glad to give way.
Thank the honourable member for giving way. I am struck by the need for intense negotiation and good relationships that form the basis of us getting a good outcome post-2026, and even in the structural reform that he describes. Does he agree with me that an adversarial nature, preventing people from intervening in historical speeches is not the way to go forward if cross-party consensus is sought and a collective view to try and get the best out of our future fishing industry post-2026?
I thank the honourable lady for her intervention and agree that we should disagree agreeably when it comes to something like a common national asset like fishing. I was racing towards a conclusion, and of course, when the honourable lady mentions 2020.
I'm grateful to the honourable lady for giving way I'm interested to see that he has rediscovered his distributist roots from Glasgow University. There are serious practical considerations here to be faced before we get to the point that he would want to get to, and which I think has some significant force. And it is the reality that most skippers in my constituency and in his are carrying massive amounts of debt and loans. And if we cut the feet out from underneath them in terms of quota reallocation and the rest, then actually the law of unintended consequences could be really severe for the people who have kept that industry going through the lean times.
Thank the honourable member for that, and as he knows, fishermen in my constituency look enviously to the north and the vast amount of value landings that have come from the Shetland feed. But if he looks a little bit further south in his own constituency, Orkney Council own prawn quota, which they then lease out to young fishers to get into the industry. And I dare say there are enough fish in the sea, but certainly there's enough quota to be shared out and not a deleterious effect on his own constituents. I was rushing, as I said, towards a conclusion, and of course when the Honourable Lady mentions 2026, I think of only one event, the Scottish parliamentary election, at which I hope this will be an issue, but of course 2026 is also the timing of quota renegotiation with the EU and with Norway on this, and I hope the additional quota and in these negotiations that we can find common ground and a way of sorting this out so that our coastal communities, our most fragile coastal communities, benefit from the resource at their doorstep.
Jim Shannon.
Can I first of all, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and can I congratulate the honourable gentleman for bringing this forward. I spoke to him earlier about it, and I'm very pleased to be here to speak. Indeed, Mr. Chairman, I think there hasn't been I can say this without any boasting, there hasn't been a fishing debate in this chamber in all the time I've been here that I haven't attended and participate in, because fishing for me and my constituency is vitally important. The honourable member for Orkney and Shetland has been here for longer than me for it, so he has spoken in every fishing debate even before that. So I thank him for his attendance as well. Why is it important? For the vital issue for not simply the fishing sector in my constituency and Northern Ireland, but also for food security throughout Northern Ireland. For this reason, I contacted the fishing representatives, and their response was clear, and I'm going to quote them as well. I'm very pleased to see the Minister in his place. I know the Minister met the representatives from Northern Ireland, and I thank him for that. That's a very good initiative from the Minister and to gauge opinion. And I reflect some of that opinion in my contribution today, and also pleased to see the Shadow Minister in his place and his interest in this matter. Also nice to see the Honourable Lady, because I think when the Honourable Lady was here in the last term of this Parliament, often active in the fishing debate we had in Westminster Chamber every year before the quota was brought around, and that was almost a date in the calendar, so it was, but lovely to see her as well. The FPOs, the fish producers organisations in Northern Ireland, have made very clear what their issues are. I deal and work with them, Harry Wick in particular, from the Irish Fish Producers Organisation. I have regular contacts with him. Key issue, Mr. Chairman, key issue for me is the visas. That's the issue the Honourable Gentleman has brought up. I think it's the issue that the Honourable Gentleman referred to as well, and others I think will refer to it as we come up. On the 24th of October, we saw seasonal visa allocations confirmed for the horticulture and the poultry sector. The Food Minister said, and I quote, "Confirming the seasonal worker visa allocation for 2025 gives growers and producers certainty." So they've got the certainty, allowing them to plan ahead and secure the labour they need to grow and thrive. I welcome that. It's the right thing to do. But it's also the right thing to do for the fishing industry. And all the fishing industry wants is the same certainty that the poultry and the horticulture sectors have. I know that's one of the questions that the Fish Producers Organisation asked the Minister this morning, and the talk we had beforehand were well focused on what's important to do. It's not the Minister's responsibility, but I'm quite sure that he will put forward that to the relevant Minister. The pathway to their growth is clear and easily achieved by showing fishermen and fisherwomen the same flexibility that has been shown to the horticulture, poultry, salmon and offshore energy industry. They deserve this, and I honestly am unable to fully understand why this certainty for the fishing sector has not been given. The scampi caught by Northern Irish Fleet is the last bastion of UK seafood, caught by UK fishermen, sold at scale in UK supermarkets. So we welcome the Minister's statement that, and I quote him, that food security is national security, and this can only be achieved by supporting food and farming businesses. The Minister is right on the nail. He said the right thing. However, inaction is contraction. So with that in mind, and against the background of what the fishing industry is already doing to support itself, and conscious that fishing businesses in Northern Ireland are now only a few months, I quote this as honestly, from bankruptcy, what are the Government and the Minister's immediate plans to address their labour supply challenges?
Honourable friend, give way.
Thank
you. My honourable friend will know very well, as he has a great fishing background in his constituency, that 30% of Northern Ireland prawns haven't been caught this year as a direct result of labour shortages. So the market is there, the produce is there, but it's the labour shortages that's holding it back. Would he agree with me that we need action on visas now? We can't keep talking about it, we need action.
Yeah. I certainly do, and I thank my honourable friend and colleague for the intervention, and that's a key issue for me in this debate, Mr Chairman. I know it's a key issue that I conveyed to the Minister beforehand. I'm confident that the Minister will take our thoughts on these issues and bring them forward to the Immigration Minister, the Secretary of State. I think it probably is. I know in the questions I've asked in the Chamber in the past, I've focused that attention on getting a visa system that works. If we've got one that works for one part of the country, for one section of the food sector, then we can do the same, I believe, mirror that for the fishing sector.
The honourable member.
Very happy to wish you.
Thank you, the honourable member, for giving way. Would he agree that it might be advantageous for the administration or the development of visas for these hard-pressed sectors to be devolved to the local administrations in Scotland and Northern Ireland, for example?
I think you pose a question I think it's better if it comes from here, but if there's an obstruction here to bringing it forward, I'm hopeful the Minister will come back to this positively. Yes, if it can happen within regional administrations, that's something to consider, but I'm very conscious of Parliament's prominence and preeminence on these decisions. I wouldn't want to do anything that would change that position if at all possible. A further issue that needs to be looked at is the apparent attempt by the Irish Government, and I'm not against the Irish Government, but we've got to make quite clear I'm a member of this great Government of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. I'm an MP in this House, as others are, everyone in this room is, so we understand the issues. So the Irish Government are trying to gerrymander what counts as Irish and what counts as UK herring quota. My local fishing industry have highlighted that with just some extremely limited science with an AFBI claim is full of so many holes to support their overtures to the EU and to the ICES. It is quite simply a transparent attempt at a smash and grab to try and recoup that they have lost through Brexit. We feel it's important to get the issue on record, and our government, my minister, my government in this House needs to support the UK fishing fleet against this blatant EU interference. The shock of Brexit is still felt in some EU fishing quarters, and one of the ways that is manifested is in increasingly desperate attempts by EU nations to secure UK quota through the back door. Our fishermen need that quota. We don't need to give it to anybody else, and we should be looking after our own at home first. And after having success claiming UK citizens, and the EU have done this as well, to their football team on the strength of very tenuous genetic links, they are now applying the same strategy to claiming herring quota as well. My goodness, at what limits will they stop? I'd appreciate if the Minister would confirm his department is alive to I say this gently, respectfully, and in a positive fashion, is alive to EU nations using weak, inaccurate and biased science as a means to circumvent honest negotiation, and can the Minister offer reassurance to the people of Northern Ireland, to the fishing sector who work in the herring boats and the processing factories, that the Minister isn't going to let other EU countries walk off with their quotas or our quotas and their jobs, and what steps will be taken to support our industry? I finish with this, Mr. Chairman. For too many years, the EU fishing industry had their living off our waters and our fish, whilst we were hampered at every turn. They now seek to abuse regulations further to dip in our pond, and this must be acknowledged and dealt with. So I say that the Honourable Lady is right. We need to negotiate. I understand that, but they also need to realise that this is our fish. These are our jobs, and with that in mind, I think negotiation has to be tempered in a way that we can be respectful. I'm respectful to the Minister because he's a decent man, honest man who does a good job. At the same time, I put forward my point of view. I put my view forward in a way that hopefully he can respect. Very happy to give way, of course.
Early on.
Well, I think I would rather, as I do with the Irish government, I mean, they are our neighbours. We have to have an economic contact with them. They'll not be getting Northern Ireland as part of their Great United Ireland because that's their constitutional position. But so we will oppose that. But that doesn't mean we can't have working relationships with neighbours. So I think we need to do that. And the Honourable Lady in her intervention, I thought was a very positive and helpful intervention. But at the same time, we need to start from a level, Mr. Chairman, a level which says that what we have is ours. And what we have, we hold it for our fishermen and fisherwomen. And with that being the case, I think the best thing for us to do now is to secure our food and industry and act accordingly for the benefit of everyone throughout this Great Britain, United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. That's what we should be doing. Thank you.
Seamus Logan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I thank the Honourable Member for Great Yarmouth for calling this debate today and for his historical inputs, which were a bit of a surprise, but nevertheless. The constituency that I represent, Aberdeenshire North and Murray East, hosts two of the largest fishing ports in the UK, Peterhead and Fraserburgh, with Aberdeenshire noted for the highest fishing GVA at £153 million in 2021, the latest year in which figures are available. That's equivalent of 48% of the entire Scottish fishing GVA. Now, the corresponding UK GVA figure is 0.03% of the UK economy. The Scottish figure is 0.21%. That is 7 times that figure. It's important to bear that in mind. 321 million is the value to the Scottish economy. It employs 4,241 people, again based on the 2021 figures. The fishing is part of the DNA of our coastal communities. The sea of disappointments that these communities have faced from the previous government's broken Brexit promises has cost them dearly, leaving the UK in a far weaker position to negotiate on fishing rights than when we still had a seat at the table in the European Union. These fishing communities are facing huge economic challenges due to the loss of freedom of movement, already referred to by an honourable member beside me. Principally, fish processors and perhaps to a lesser extent the catching sector are facing labour shortages alongside new trade barriers erected by a Tory Brexit deal that was supported by Labour at the time. Trade barriers are estimated at 30% increase in transport costs and a 50% increase in packaging costs. It is feared that the European Union will use the new Labour government's desire to renegotiate the UK's trade deal with the EU as leverage to secure greater access for EU fishing fleets to UK waters in the pre-2026 negotiations. Now, with the new Labour government promising a reset ahead of the TCA negotiations in 2026, there are serious concerns that the coupling of fishing negotiations with those on energy might be a problem. The potential linkage between energy and fishing in whatever deal is agreed could result in fishing communities in the North East suffering a far worse deal after 2026. If this happens, the blame will lay squarely with the Westminster Government, but it is the Scottish fishing communities that will pay the price. The Minister, and I agree with my colleague that he's doing an excellent job, but he needs to reassure these communities in my constituency and indeed across Scotland and these islands that the UK Government will liaise with the Scottish Government and the Scottish fisheries groups to ensure that the best possible deal can be renegotiated when the TCA expires and that access to our waters will not become a casualty of any new trade deals. I ask him to ensure that these points are fully considered in the coming negotiations. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I congratulate the honourable member for Great Yarmouth for securing this debate. Now, Boston and Skegness. Boston has a rich and long history in fishing. Lincolnshire ports represented about 20% of all fish eaten in Britain in the 20th century. But my fishermen in Boston have been let down for decades under the EU membership. They were delighted to leave the European Union, and also by over-regulation. They're deeply concerned about the regulatory pressures from the Environment Agency and from IFCAs that frankly seem more designed to strangle what's left of our fishing industry than to enhance it. So 2026 is an opportunity for the Great Reset, an opportunity to take back control of our waters properly and to start again, because we all know that the previous government, under the leadership of Theresa May and then Boris Johnson, they failed to secure the promised good deal for fishing in the same way that they failed to secure a good deal for Northern Ireland. But this is the opportunity. But in business, we all know that no deal is better than a bad deal. And that has to be the starting position for this negotiation. We know that EU members are already desperate to start negotiations as soon as possible. And as the honourable member quite rightly identified there is a serious risk, as the Minister and the Chair may know, that the EU will use the renegotiation of the energy deal at the same time, ending at the same time, as unacceptable pressure and leverage on a fishing deal. So it is vital that those two elements are decoupled, and we work on the basis that no deal is better than a bad deal. Frankly, for both of those renegotiations, but they must not be allowed to be linked. Otherwise, we will continue to end up with a bad deal. So I would urge the Minister and this government to start from that common point. I will go back to the Honourable Richard.
I fear he may be, and his party may be targeting the wrong people when he blames the EU for the lack of fishing in British waters, because half of England's fishing quota is ultimately owned by Dutch, Icelandic and Spanish interests. And the problem is not access to waters. The problem is concentration of ownership of the quota we already have. And the way to revive communities like his and Great Yarmouth, with which we have historic herring fishing connections, is to redistribute that quota and make sure that the quota we have, an additional quota, is given to fragile fishing communities. Not keeping the foreigners out, it's making sure that the wealth of the seas is distributed fairly.
I thank the honourable gentleman for that interesting intervention. But the key point, first of all, in order to secure any form of distribution, is that we've got the quotas. You can then talk about distribution. And yes, it can take time. But I repeat the point, Mr. Chairman, that no deal is better than a bad deal. If we allow ourselves to go into this negotiation on the basis we must do a deal, then we're going to end up with a bad deal. We've been there. We can do so much better. It's a great opportunity. Let's grasp it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Caroline Bowden.
Thank you, Chair. It's an honour to serve under your chairmanship, and I congratulate the honourable member for securing this debate. I am grateful for the opportunity to speak on an issue that is a crucial one in my constituency of South Devon, which is the home of Brixham Fishing Port, which is the most valuable port in England and Wales in terms of catch landed. And I hesitate to say the next line because I was going to say that Brixham's fishing industry has a history that goes back over 1,000 years, but we're not going to go quite as far back as Napoleon and Nelson and have another history lesson. In the late 18th century, the industry boomed when trawling was introduced as a method of catching fish. But it's still a vibrant harbour today, and last year alone, Brixham recorded an impressive £60 million in fish sales. It deals with some of the finest catches available, landing premium species such as cuttlefish, plaice, sole and monkfish, species highly valued not only by UK buyers but by European markets. However, while Brixham has much to be proud of, the community is facing profound challenges, many of which have been exacerbated by our withdrawal from the European Union. Now, despite the promises that some of the honourable members here present made during the referendum campaign, promises of greater control, increased quotas and a more prosperous future, too many of our fishers now find themselves in a precarious position, and the reality is that the South West fishing industry has not seen the same benefits as other regions regarding quota uplifts. This disparity, Mr Chair, has left many in our local community feeling forgotten and sidelined in the broader national conversation, and I would agree with the Honourable Member for Great Yarmouth that our fishing communities do need more support and investment. We would perhaps approach it in a different way. Brexit was sold to our fishermen as a golden opportunity, yet the truth is that many of them have experienced the complete opposite. Instead of gaining more control, they have been met with a series of hurdles that makes their lives harder. The administrative burdens associated with exports to the EU remain a significant issue. Around 70% of the catch is exported predominantly to the EU. They are now facing massive trade barriers, and stable access to EU markets is critical. The sheer cost of additional paperwork has been eye-watering, with fishermen struggling to pass on increased selling prices to their long-standing customers. As a result, they have lost trading relationships and they find themselves with no choice but to absorb these rising costs. On top of that, the sheer volume and rate of change at the UK level has added to the confusion and uncertainty, with 43 fisheries management plans in place, along with marine protected area management, offshore renewables and new EU regulations. Our fishers are left navigating a complex web of policies. Poor implementation and imprecise scientific advice has also led to total allowable catch cuts, which threaten the livelihoods of those who depend on fishing. This is not the control that was promised. It is a recipe for frustration and despair. The reality is that the government's handling of the post-Brexit fishing policy has been disappointing. Promises made during the referendum campaign have not materialised into tangible benefits for our coastal communities. And fishermen are left feeling betrayed, facing a landscape filled with uncertainty rather than the bright, sunlit uplands with which they were promised. I will give way.
I thank her for giving way, and I rise on that point because I've just written down the word sunlit uplands, and would she agree that actually fishermen around the country have been sold down the river on the basis of empty promises, simple solutions that simply do not exist. And we've got members in this room that are offering brinksmanship as a solution that doesn't provide the security that fishing communities deserve.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her intervention, and I would absolutely agree. And funnily enough, Brixham was quite a Brexit-supporting community, and as a very proud Remainer, I had hesitations about Brixham, as part of the constituency at first. But as I tour around the constituency now, it's astonishing how many people in the local fishing community openly tell me that they feel betrayed and that they were lied to by promises that could never have been met. We must be honest about the challenges that have arisen and acknowledge that our departure from the EU has not yielded the benefits that were claimed. Sadly, the Honourable Member for Clacton, who seems to have strayed quite far from his constituency this week, failed to stand up for the fishing community when he apparently represented them in Brussels, attending only 1 out of 42 European Parliament Fisheries Committee meetings in 3 years. Far from the EU gutting the UK fishing industry, it didn't have a chance of being properly heard during that time. Its voice was simply not heard because he was not in the room.
Taking the money, then.
So as we look toward 2026, we have a responsibility with the renegotiation to chart a new course that does prioritise the interests of all our fishing communities. We need a strategy rooted in 3 essential principles: fair access, sustainable management and economic support for growth within the UK seafood sector. We need fairer access to our waters. We would all agree with that. Under the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, we will have a significant opportunity to redefine access to UK waters, although I fear we are not starting from a strong position, given recent history. Access to EU markets is crucial. Yes, I will give way.
I'm very grateful to you for giving way. But that's the key point. That is the key point. This is the moment for the Great Reset. And actually, we're in agreement because you quite rightly highlighted that much of the problems is actually not from leaving the European Union. It's the failures of our previous government, and we're very critical of them, in negotiating a bad deal and then the civil servants implementing it with unnecessary regulation. So actually, this is the opportunity. Would she agree with that?
I thank the honourable member. I would agree that it is an opportunity to renegotiate, but I don't think we're going to have a successful renegotiation if we start from the position that the EU is the enemy and that, you know, we have to go into it with a positive mindset and we have to be willing to cooperate with our closest neighbours if we're going to get any kind of resolution.
Honourable Lady, give way. I won't trip you up.
Just on this point of negotiations that we're all discussing, I think everyone would agree that camaraderie where it can be found and agreeableness where it can be found is a good thing, but you do not win a negotiation with weakness. And I think starting from a position of strength, being firm and resolute with that strength, and then extending kindness second is probably more effective than just the over-friendliness that's being suggested here, given the fact that we haven't had good results in the past. So would you agree with me that perhaps a little bit of strength is necessary, even though we all agree that some kindness is as well?
I thank the honourable member for his intervention, and I would say that we on this side of the House are resolute in our strength and our desire to protect the UK fishing industry, but we will do it with kindness. Access to EU markets is crucial, and restrictions would risk not only livelihoods but also the £60 million in revenue that supports hundreds of jobs locally to me. While we negotiate with the EU, we must ensure that local small fishermen are prioritised and protected. Excuse me. In Brixham, approximately 80% of the boats are owned by small family-run businesses, and these smaller enterprises cannot afford lengthy delays or steep tariffs. They are the backbone of our community, and we must prioritise their industries, ensuring that small-scale fishers benefit, not just the large-scale operators, as my honourable friend opposite has mentioned. We also have to have a discussion around visas, as several honourable members have mentioned. And sustainable management of our marine environment is also important. The health of fish stocks and marine biodiversity. I will give way.
Thank you. I thank the honourable member for giving way. Talking about sustainability, I'd just like to highlight the work of the Whitby lobster hatcheries. Released 25,000 baby lobsters into the ocean. We are Yorkshire, we are the capital, the lobster capital of Europe, and it is really important that we can trade and sell lobsters. Thank you.
Shellfish is equally a very important industry that we must do far more to protect, and I know in my part of the world we have a budding aquaculture industry, mussels and oysters. They're good healthy food, they capture carbon and they improve marine biodiversity, but again they have been severely hampered by export red tape. They cannot export easily to Europe. They could expand massively if they were given the support required. Also, just one other point on that for my honourable friend from Northern Ireland. The water classification rules in England differ from Northern Ireland, which is purely a political decision. It has nothing to do with the health of the water, and I would suggest that that was a purely political decision by the previous government, and I would implore the Minister to look at that, and if he would like to have a conversation with me about that, I would be very happy to do so. So fishermen, stewards of our marine ecosystem, they know better than anyone how important it is to preserve fish stocks, and the government and scientists must work with them to produce a sustainable...
Will the Honourable Lady give way on that point?
I will give way.
Thank you.
That's my pleasure.
While this debate focuses on the future of fishing, we also need fisheries that are fit for the future. So does she agree with me that collaboration with our fishing communities, like those in South East Cornwall, is essential to achieve our shared goals of fish stock recovery and safeguarding a sustainable future for our fishing industry?
I thank the Honourable Lady, and I would absolutely agree that we need collaboration between the science and the fishing industry to make sure that we have a productive fishing industry which can survive, and also sustainable fishing stocks. The new Labour government must increase funding for marine research and work with fishers to implement sustainable fishing methods. You've predicted the next bit of my speech. We need more selected gear, better bycatch policies and fair quotas based on scientific evidence. In the long term, I think in the UK we should aim for gold-plated sustainable fishing practices across the UK, which reflect both our commitment to environmental sustainability and our understanding that healthy fish stocks are the bedrock of this industry.
Will my honourable friend give way?
I will give way.
Thank you again for giving way. She mentioned bedrocks and oysters, and she may know that the North Norfolk coast is a perfect place for oyster beds. We've got a number of flourishing businesses in this sector. I'm sure she's also aware that oysters are excellent at sequestering carbon from the atmosphere and can play their own special part in tackling the climate emergency. Does she agree with me that the innovative solutions like this can be both beneficial to the future of fishing and to the future of our planet?
I thank the Honourable Member, and I would completely agree. I have oyster farmers in my constituency who are currently doing battle with the Duchy of Cornwall, who wants to get rid of them, and we're trying to ensure that they can be allowed to stay there. Growth for the UK seafood sector, we must also invest in that. That means investing in modernised port facilities and processing plants to maximise the value of each catch. I know that in Brixham we've seen tremendous success in recent years, but the industry does need further investment across the UK, and that will also support ailing coastal communities as well as just the fishing industry. Lastly, we must consider marine spatial squeeze. Fishing grounds, marine protected areas and now renewable offshore energy installations are all competing for the same space. Yet the fishing industry is merely asked to consult on plans for new renewables. Why is the industry not consulted at the outset to try and find suitable locations for offshore wind? Just giving them a few weeks to respond to plans that have already been laid out is insulting and inadequate. So to conclude, Mr Chair, as we approach the renegotiations for 2026, we have a unique opportunity to redefine the fishing industry's future, a future in which ports like Brixham can not only survive but thrive, where fishers are the respected custodians of our seas and where our coastal communities can prosper as they rightly deserve. And I look forward to us working across the House together for the benefit of all our fishing communities.
Hear, hear, well said.
Shadow Minister Robbie Moore.
Thank you, Mr Efford, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And can I thank the Honourable Member for Great Yarmouth for securing this really important debate and bringing it forward to the House. As an island nation, fishing is one of the most valuable resources our country possesses, and I echo many of the comments that have been made by many honourable members throughout this debate in championing our fishermen and our wider fishing sector. Of course, towns and communities across the coast were built on fishing, and just as the previous government committed to levelling up across the country, we remain committed and will continue to be committed to supporting our coastal communities and supporting the fishing industries which they are based in. A major part of the commitment was announcement in December of 2021 when the last Conservative government announced £100 million to specifically support long-term future of our UK fishing sector, supporting job creation and boosting seafood exports to new markets. And the last Conservative administration also began the process of replacing the EU's common fisheries policy with new bespoke framework for UK fisheries. 6 fishery management plans have already been consulted on, covering major species, including bass, scallops, lobster and crabs. And I'd be grateful to the Minister if he could outline what progress he has made in continuing these efforts and delivering on this with the remaining management plans. Given the importance of the fishing sector, it was deeply concerning that there was no mention of fishing in the Labour manifesto. I'm sure that this was deeply worrying to the industry at large, but also we are unaware of what the Labour government's future plans are as we get closer to 2026. The government must also set out its ambitions right now and its plan as we go forward up to the renegotiation of the 2026 arrangements of the conclusion of the UK-EU trade and cooperation agreement. And we must re-enter those negotiations now so that we can provide certainty for the wider sector. Of course, as a report was committed to and outlined earlier in 2023, since 2021, the UK has completed 3 sets of annual fishery negotiations as an independent coastal state, including bilateral negotiations with the EU, trilateral negotiations with the EU and Norway, and with coastal states in the North East Atlantic and beyond. And this concluded that the latest negotiations were that the UK fishing industry could benefit from 665,000 tonnes of fishing opportunities that were realised in 2023, worth over 750 million. As a result of quota share uplifts agreed in the TCA, the UK has around 115,000 tonnes more quota from the 2023 negotiations than it would have had received with its previous shares as an EU member state. So 2026 is an incredibly important year, and that given that the TCA requires a level of interaction from the government, could the Minister outline what levels of conversations he and his department are having at the moment? And also, could the Minister confirm that UK fisheries will not be used as a bargaining chip by the government to secure a more favourable energy relationship with the EU, as has already been mentioned by many members in this debate? I would also like to raise the importance of supporting the entire fishing supply chain. The UK has an incredible natural resource in our coastal waters, but we must ensure that the whole of the sector is sufficiently supported to properly exploit it. Domestic fishing processing and sale is just as important as our fishing fleet in ensuring that we have a robust fishing industry that can strengthen our national food security. And that is why I am deeply concerned that the introduction of a raft of new labour reforms and employment reforms that may threaten the whole of the food processing agenda, including our fishing industry, to making it harder and more expensive for our businesses to be able to carry out their activities. And I will give way.
Rather than it being a labour issue that's caused consternation in the fishing sector, actually it is the previous government's proposals and plans that were implemented that have really seriously affected distant water fishermen, leaving us with just one distant water ship operating in the UK, and their catch has now dropped to under 6,500 tonnes. That's a reduction of 70%. Under his government's leadership, that gap is being filled by fish from Norway, Iceland and Russia. Does he think that actually we need to have some improved negotiations with our neighbours in the likes of Norway to restore jobs and fish to this country?
Well, what I recognise is right now is that the current government have a real opportunity to reset that moment with the negotiations as they're going into with the European Union. And up until 2026, there is an opportunity to provide much more certainty to the fishing fleet. But actually, as has been mentioned by honourable members on this side of the House, it is incredibly important, in my view, when you're going into negotiations, to set the bar incredibly high so that you're able to get the landing pitch right to make sure that we get the best result for our UK fishing industry. And if that means setting the bar that high that you are unwilling to enter into a deal that is not set too early, then so be it, because at the end of the day you have to get the right result for our fishing industry, because at the end of the day it's the UK fishing industry that is at threat if that is not achieved. So coming back to the concerns that I was raising around employment law, I'd just be grateful if the Minister could outline any economic analysis that was undertaken as a result of the employment bill that has been introduced into the House, specifically on the fishing sector, as I am deeply concerned that the introduction of a raft of new labour reforms will threaten the fishing sector, not only hiking up employers' national insurance rates and lowering the threshold, hiking up the minimum wage and introducing one-day right rights that pile on risk for employers. This is the concerns that have been raised to me and other members within the House, that the pressures will be put on the fishing industry. And that is why
the honourable member give way?
It's important that we get discussions right at this time. And I will give way.
Thank you. I come from Fleetwood and our fishing industry was decimated after the Cod War. My husband works in fish processing where I am, and let me tell you that Brexit, which was introduced under your leadership of your party, destroyed the export of fishing from Fleetwood. We used to export every Monday. A van used to come from Peterhead. It used to stop at Fleetwood. We used to fill it up with fish and it went out to France. That never happened after we left Europe, the European Union. So I have to tell you, and as for the legislation that the Labour Party are bringing in, this secures jobs on Fleetwood Dock, and it looks after the men that work. It's very hard work in fish processing. It's very cold, and it is a skill, and we need to invest in... Okay, sorry. I apologise.
And I thank the honourable member for her intervention, but I would have to politely disagree with the concerns that have been raised by wider businesses and wider industry on the impact that the Employment Rights Bill will have on employers, not only those that are wanting to recruit temporary staff, but those that are directly involved throughout the whole of the supply chain. I'm well aware, having got a farming background, how difficult it is in any primary industry when you're producing food, not least the fishing industry or the farming sector. But I have to stress to the Minister, could we see exactly the economic impact and the economic analysis on the food processing sector that has been put out there by the government, and what his view is in terms of the impact it will have on the primary industry sector, because I fear that it is far worse than what the government is saying. So, Mr Efford, I would like to conclude by saying that we all want to see fairer access and a fairer deal for our fishermen. Now is the time is of the essence as we go up to 2026, and I do hope that the government will aim high in their aspirations in achieving a better deal for our fishermen.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Efford. It's a special pleasure to serve when you are in the chair. And can I thank all honourable members today for their contributions, and particularly thank the honourable member for Great Yarmouth for securing this debate. I remember in the last Parliament it was a happy band of members that often used to assemble for fisheries debates, and I suspect we'll be seeing the same people gathering over the months and years ahead, and I look forward to constructive discussions with them. It's very good, a very timely opportunity to have the opportunity to talk about the UK's fishing and seafood industry, because it's such an important part of the UK's food system. And I very much welcome the chance to set out some of my views. And I'll try and briefly address some of the points that have been raised by members from across the chamber. And I listened closely to the honourable gentleman's introduction. He's absolutely right about the historic strength of the Great Yarmouth fishing sector. I know Yarmouth reasonably well. And, of course, those were halcyon days. The world has changed for a variety of reasons. Not necessarily sure I'd necessarily agree with his historical analysis, but I think it's always important to remember just what a great industry it was, and to reflect other contributions, what a great industry it is going to be again, because we really do have opportunities. I was delighted to hear interventions from the new co-chairs of the all-party parliamentary group, my honourable friend from Grimsby and the right honourable gentleman from Orkney and Shetland, and again I look forward to working with them closely over the months and years ahead. And I very much enjoyed the speeches from my honourable friends from the Western Isles, who always speaks powerfully on behalf of his constituents. I listened closely to the contribution, as always, from the honourable member for Strangford, and he's right, I have been talking to, of course, all the fisheries organisations over the last few months, and I understand the points that are made about scampi and about herring. I listened also closely to the contributions from the honourable gentleman from Boston and Skegness, particularly about the European Union. I suspect it will come as no surprise to him that I don't entirely agree with his analysis, but I look forward to continuing the debate. And I'm afraid there are probably others who I have now missed, but I will come back to as I go through my contributions, because I think one of the things that struck me about all the contributions is a recognition of just how significant the fishing industry is, not just in terms of food producers, but culturally significant to our sense of identity in this country, particularly in the remote coastal communities. Really important role. And also, it's a really dangerous job. It's a really difficult job. And I think we should all be conscious of the risks that fishers face as they go to work. And just last week, it's brought home to me by the difficulties that I heard about with the Fraserburgh-based vessel Odyssey. I should say, I again welcome the comments from the member there. I visited Fraserburgh and was very impressed by what I saw. But that vessel, 6 members were rescued, which I think is welcome to all of us. But it is a dangerous industry, and we should pay tribute to all those people who put their lives at risk to secure our food supply. Moving on to the broader picture about what this government is trying to achieve, the Prime Minister has talked about the missions that will drive the government, and our fisheries have an important role across several of those priorities. Certainly, as I've already said, in terms of food security, but also in terms of helping us protect our marine environment, that's so important. And in terms of on shore, again, as we've heard, many more jobs often on shore, key role in boosting regional economic growth. And in general, better fisheries management will be helpful as we tackle that huge challenge of nature recovery, which is so important for the future of all of us. Now, the future of fisheries in 2026 title, I think, does hint at our relationship with the European Union, as honourable gentlemen have already suggested. And as a government, we've been very upfront about talking about the need to reset our relationship with the European Union. And of course, we're going to work closely with our near neighbours to identify our areas where we can strengthen cooperation that is to our mutual benefit. And I would just point out that 2026, of course, is the year when the temporary adjustment period for fisheries access ends, as described in the UK-EU Trade and Cooperation Agreement. Now, during that adjustment period, we've actually successfully concluded, or DEFRA has successfully concluded, and I pay tribute to my predecessors, they've worked hard on this. They've concluded 4 annual negotiations with the EU since 2020, and what that has shown is that we do have the ability to build a strong relationship on fisheries matters with the European Union, and we've put in place strong foundations upon which to take forward future agreements to benefit both our shared fish stocks and our respective industries. And our working relationship with the EU on fisheries matters remains strong. And as we are debating here today, DEFRA officials are commencing the 5th set of annual consultations with the EU, where we will set fishing opportunities for 2025. But I should point out that while we may be close partners with the EU, the significant difference is the future of fisheries is not now driven by the relationships. We are now masters of our own destiny. I'm very happy to take an intervention.
James Lowe. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for giving way. You're describing the new deal that you're going to reach with the European Union, but it doesn't address the problems to do with freedom of movement and the labour shortages that some of us already mentioned. So can you say something about your plans to deal with those labour shortages through new visa arrangements, please? Thank you.
Honourable members keep referring to you. You're speaking through the chair. When you say you mean me. It's a mistake that I've made, but I just want to remind you that don't use the word you. It's the honourable member or the minister.
Well,
then you're correct. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. I'd be delighted if you were to resolve all these issues, but it falls to me. But the honourable gentleman is tempting me into a wider discussion about the reset of the European Union, and I will speak carefully and limit my observations to fisheries today. But I will acknowledge that the labour challenges are a particular challenge for this sector, and there are benefits to be found if we can get a good outcome. But my point I was making was it's our own domestic priorities, particularly the environmental, social and economic factors that we are now able to place at the centre of our priorities for UK fisheries. I certainly will.
As part part of those negotiations, will he be ensuring that the distant water fleet that has been very successful in terms of providing jobs and training and supporting the fishing industry will be at the forefront of those discussions?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. She raises an important point. In fact, it allows me the opportunity to also follow up on the points raised by the Shadow Minister, which I haven't yet addressed. Yes, of course, the distant fleet has had a challenging time, to put it mildly. So we are well aware of trying to achieve a fair balance across all sectors of the UK fishing industry as we look ahead to these negotiations. And I can also reassure the Shadow Ministers on the fisheries management plans. We're just consulting on a further 5 of those. And in general, I would say that we're trying to seek a balanced outcome, as I'm sure his government did, that will benefit all sectors. On the skills issue, very, very important, we've recently set up the UK Seafood Careers Programme, which we hope will begin to help address some of this long-term issue, this long-term challenge of how we boost our domestic workforce. Very important. Also, of course, changes the apprenticeship levy ought to help. I'll take an intervention from my colleague and then go to the other side.
Very quickly, I'm very grateful to the Minister for being so generous. I just wanted to highlight Lincoln University's Centre of Excellence that is going to be established in my constituency, Great Grimsby and Cleethorpes, and they will be focusing on those high-need skills in the processing sector, which we haven't spoken of a great deal, to support people in the local area into processing jobs that are high-skilled and well-paid and long-term. And would he join me in welcoming that?
Yes, I most certainly will, and can I say how much I enjoyed visiting both Lincoln University and her constituency about approximately a year ago, and I'm sure I'll be back again soon. But I think there was an intervention from the other side as well.
The Minister very much for his response. Minister, the Honourable Member for Aberdeen North and Moray East referred to the visa issues, and I suggested, Mr Chairman, that one of the ideas maybe to help the Minister in his discussions with the Immigration Minister, that because the poultry sector and the horticulture sector have already been given seasonal worker status, that's a visa system. The same system would work for the fishermen and the fishing sector at that opportunity. Again, Minister, don't mind me pressing you on it. Please do speak to the Immigration Minister, because if you can do it for one, you can do it for the other.
I very much hear what the Honourable Gentleman is saying, and the visa issues, they are complicated, but they are also important, and there certainly could be opportunities if we can achieve the right outcome, but I absolutely hear what he is saying. Let me return to where I was in terms of the Fisheries Act 2020, which sets the broad outlines of where we'll be going in the future, and of course the Joint Fisheries Statement that followed from that. They detail the objectives for a thriving and sustainable fishing industry that I know we all want to see. And since 2020, the UK has demonstrated its own approach to fisheries and our role on the international stage. As an international coastal state, our relationship with the EU sits alongside our relationships with other international partners, as well as, of course, those domestic partners. Now, as a coastal state, it's our status as an independent coastal state that gives us the right to negotiate with others in the North East Atlantic on management measures for mackerel, blue whiting and Atlanto-Scandian herring. And these are important stocks for the UK, which sadly have been overfished in recent years because there's a lack of proper sharing arrangements in place between the coastal states. And we are pushing for comprehensive quota sharing arrangements that are in the best interest of stock sustainability and of the UK catching and processing sectors. Now, as honourable members will be aware, a full and faithful implementation of the fisheries heading of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement will see access for EU vessels to the UK zone become a matter for annual negotiation, to sit alongside our annual consultations on catch limits with a range of coastal states and international fora on fishing opportunities. And let me repeat what I've already said. Our ambitions for fisheries are no longer tied to the EU Common Fisheries Policy. We have our own objectives for our own UK fishing industry, and they're central to our priorities and the thriving and sustainable fishing industry we want. Now, as I've already referenced, the fisheries management plans are a key part of the way we intend to take the industry forward. And again, I pay tribute to the previous government. They set this process in train, and we're very pleased to continue it, and we're very grateful for the support of the fishing sector and wider stakeholders in helping to shape these plans, which I think have probably been looked at elsewhere around the world as an example of how best to manage these complicated trade-offs that we find in our maritime space. And these are being developed collaboratively with the fishing industry. I would say in passing that the spokesperson for the Liberal Democrats raised the spatial squeeze issue. We're very, very aware of that, and we'll be coming back to the House with proposals in coming months and years. But the fisheries management plans will play a crucial role in supporting the long-term sustainability of fishing businesses and delivering growth in coastal communities. Now, it's internationally recognised, as I say, as the gold standard in managing fisheries. They protect and, where necessary, set out how to maintain or restore fish stocks to sustainable levels. And progress is being made. We've now published a 6th plan, and work is being done to implement actions in the previously published plans. And legislation was recently introduced which will bring a number of the fisheries management measures set out in those plans into law. As I said, on the 10th of October, we opened consultations on the next 5 FMPs. But beyond FMPs, we're also putting in place a wider set of other fisheries management reforms which are in line with our own domestic priorities as an independent coastal state. They include, for example, the way we manage discards, the introduction of remote electronic monitoring, trialling new ways to allocate quota, and the opening of new fisheries such as the bluefin tuna, which I'm sure the honourable gentleman will welcome. And we will, of course, be looking at all ways to reform and best support all sectors within the UK's fisheries to help our fishing and seafood industry thrive and contribute to economic growth and the nation's food security. Now, we're also considering the role of inshore and under 10-metre fisheries, including those in my part of the world in the east of England, and how we can best support that sector. Now, a number of initiatives we're undertaking will benefit those inshore fishers, including the provision of additional quota and new quota trials, which should help the inshore fleet in the long run. And we're continuing to engage with the 5 regional fisheries groups that have been set up for inshore fishers to discuss concerns with policymakers and regulators to help identify problems, contribute to policy development and to secure solutions. So in conclusion, Mr Efford, the future of UK fisheries will be driven by our domestic agenda. We have domestic frameworks, including the Fisheries Act and joint fisheries statements, and policies such as the fisheries management plans that are part of the improvements we seek to make. For many years, our fisheries management was dictated by the EU Common Fisheries Policy. That is no longer the case. Our relationship with the EU remains important and sits alongside other relationships we hold as an independent coastal state. We will continue to meet our international obligations, including those of the TCA, and the default arrangements for access after 2026 are clear. There are many opportunities ahead for our fishing sector. This government is committed to making the most of them to secure the industry and make sure that it can best contribute to our country's food security and economic growth. But this will be driven by our own domestic objectives.
Brief summing up, Rupert Lowe.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. First of all, let me say I'm sorry, I apologise for not taking more interventions during my opening speech, but I consulted widely with my constituents and they were very keen that I got that message across uninterrupted. And the second point I'd make is I make no apology for going back over history. As Churchill said, the farther you look back, the farther forward you can see. So, on summing up on various interventions, which I think is my duty, I think I'm right in saying I'm not very good at Celtic, but I think the member for Ross and Cromarty, and as a thank you very much. My Celtic is not great. So thank you very much for his intervention. I agree with him. We do need a complete review of our fishing arrangements now that we have the ability to do that. The honourable member for Strangford, I thought, made some extremely valuable points, particularly about visas, but also I think we talked about apprenticeships today, and I think it's incredibly important. I run businesses in electrical contracting, and we have a huge apprenticeship scheme, and I think that is something we should be looking at for the fishing industry and the fish processing industry, to your point. The member for Aberdeenshire North.
This is a brief summing up of the debate. An opportunity for the honourable member to get his message across to the Minister, not to go around all the speakers and respond to all their points.
Okay,
So if you could
I
sum
just
up
say,
briefly.
I've got a briefly more. I think the other point I wanted to make about the debate, which came out quite clearly, is that the British people did vote to take back our own sovereignty. That, I'm afraid, is an indisputable fact, and that is something we have to respect. And therefore, the government's job is to protect the interests of the British people. That is their primary job, and I think it's important we understand that. And I think that the Honourable Member for Boston and Skegness raised an incredibly important point, which is over-regulation. And over-regulation in all our markets is now rife. It's destroyed our stock market, and if we're not careful, over-regulation strangles enterprise and damages our industries. So I think I'd like to thank everybody else for their various speeches and interventions. And in my summing up, I think we can all agree that the way the British fishing industry has been treated by those in these corridors is nothing short of unacceptable. Ignored, forgotten, sacrificed, we've let entire coastal communities rot and decay because this place did not have the courage to fight for them. Whole towns decimated, once thriving economies ruined. It's a shameful legacy that has alienated entire generations up and down our coastline. We're an island nation surrounded by some of the most fertile seas on the planet, yet we're a net importer of fish. Does anything sum up the sheer madness of Britain's relentless managed decline more than that? Yeah. The fishermen of Great Yarmouth deserve better, the fishermen of Norfolk deserve better, and the fishermen of every single coastal town and port deserve better. I would like to finish, Mr. Chairman, if that's all right, with one quote from Aneurin Bevan that I thought hit the mark. He said, "This island is made mainly of coal and surrounded by fish. Only an organising genius could produce a shortage of coal and fish at the same time." Thank you very much.
Order, order. The question is that this House has considered the future of fishing after 2026. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting is suspended until 4 o'clock.